Well, here we are, the final session of Financial Inclusion Week 2024. I'm Jayshree Venkatesan, and I lead the Consumer Protection Research Portfolio at the Center for Financial Inclusion. I also lead our strategic industry engagement through both the Financial Inclusion Week and the Responsible Finance Forum. And we have today Karthik Venkataraman, who's the CEO. I'll let you introduce yourself, Karthik.
Yeah, hi everyone. I'm Karthik Venkataraman. I'm the Chief Operating Officer at Accion International. I joined recently, Accion. I've been around the industry for some time, though. I was a partner at Bain & Company for many years, leading the social impact practice there. So it's a joy to be with all of you and close out what has been an amazing Financial Inclusion Week. One note, we are both actually sitting in the same room together, though on different screens. So if you see us looking across the room, we're looking at each other. So,
thank you for that. This is your first Financial Inclusion Week.
Yeah.
What did you think?
So first of all, I want to thank all of you for joining. We had over 3,000 people register and join over the course of the week from 124 countries. And my first sort of thought is it's just such an incredible community that we're building and that you're all part of, and you have made and have helped create this community of people who are passionate about financial inclusion and all the other social challenges that financial inclusion helps address. I'm also struck that this is a forum where people are willing and willing to really grapple with difficult topics and debate those topics and create a platform for conversation that I think is incredibly important as we sort of think about the next 10 years. I mean, I know we're on our 10th anniversary of Financial Inclusion Week, and the last 10 years have represented a lot of progress, but there is a lot more work for all of us to do.
Mm-hmm. And I'm curious because, this has been hours and hours and hours of programming. Are there crucial, memorable moments that stand out for you?
It is, I think, hard to pick a few. I mean, there have been so many sort of incredible sessions and topics. I'm actually going to go back to something really important that we heard in one of the very first sessions of the week, and something that Ajay said in the interview that Michael Schlein, my colleague Michael Schlein and Ajay did in the beginning of the week. Ajay made the point that financial services and financial inclusion is in some ways a gateway, right, for addressing a lot of other important sort of social challenges that are out there. It's not about the financial inclusion itself. It's about what people are able to do with those financial services and products to improve their lives, to improve their livelihoods, whether that is starting and growing a small business, whether that is as a smallholder farmer, particularly as we think about the gender gaps that we have seen and are starting to close over time, but it's really about the connections, and in particular, I think thinking about climate, mm-hmm. right? And we'll get into this a little bit more, but one of my real takeaways and through line through the week is really, that we need to all clearly be thinking about climate and all the downstream effects of climate change and how the work we do plugs into that and is so important there. So I think that going back to Ajay's first session, I think is quite memorable for me.
That's great. I am going to ask the audience to also drop in the chat what you might have retained as your most memorable moments, and it's with the recognition that you've had a lot of information just streamed at you over this week. I think for me, what stood out was this whole idea of intersectionality.
Yeah.
And we often speak about it in the context of gender.
Yeah.
But when we think about the 2 billion that remain underserved and the 3 billion that are now digitally excluded, I think the intersectionality of gender, disabilities, health, and all these other factors, the people that are at the intersection are the most vulnerable.
Yeah.
And we talk too glibly about risks or trade-offs. And I think we need to be much more intentional, because for them, it's not the simple issue of trade-offs. It's often the case of critical life choices.
Yeah.
About what to eat or who eats and what to forego and who to send to school. And I think that is really important for us to keep in mind as we drive inclusion over the next 10 years.
There's also been, I think, a lot of discussion around the customer journey over the course of the week. And what you are describing, Jayshree, makes me think about how we need to do a better job of thinking about the customer journey beyond that point of sale, let's call it, right? When people get access, when people start using, even if they keep using, right? And understanding that the journey is about a broader life and the choices and trade-offs that people are making in their lives, well outside the financial services and products they're doing, right? And really kind of understanding those journeys in a kind of micro segmented way, right? And we'll come back to this, because I think a lot of the work that we still have to do is around that space. But I think that's also, and we've heard so much about the customer journey over the course of the week. I can't even pick out one session, right? It's been another through line over the course of the week that's been pretty salient.
Yeah, and I'm glad you picked up on the customer journey. So I do want to probe a little bit on that, because financial services doesn't end; it actually starts at the point of sale.
Yeah.
And how your life interacts with it then goes on. I have an easy job compared to yours, because I do research and I point out risks and potential solutions. You have the job of leading a team that then has to implement it on the ground and find solutions. So as someone that wears that hat, what do you see as the emerging areas that we should focus on as an industry?
Yeah, thanks, Jayshree. It's a really important question, and first of all, I will say first that it is a real privilege, right, to be working in this space and get up every morning thinking about, right, what is the work we can do that helps people, right, in this way, and gives people the choices that they want to have. I think there are a few areas that come to my mind as things that we could continue to do more work on as an industry. And again, not to state the obvious, but the next 2 billion, that last 2 billion will be harder, right, than the last 2 billion that we have been, working on and bringing into the financial sort of system, right? So with that, I think a couple of things. So first of all, we've talked a lot about really measuring outcomes over the course of this week. I think we need to continue to take a longitudinal view of that, right? And really measure outcomes over the medium term, over the long term, and outcomes beyond, again, the financial services and products, right? Really thinking about, how is it helping to address gender equity? What is it doing for people's lives and livelihoods in the jobs they create, in the farms they run, right? How is it helping them to be resilient, right, in the face of the risks? And I'll come back to the risks in a minute, because I think there are so many of them out there, right, that I think it takes we have to take a much more sort of nuanced view, right, of how these things fit together. But really, again, measuring those outcomes in the medium and long term, and putting the processes and systems in place to do that, right, more effectively, I think is one. And frankly, talking to customers, right, talking to the end customers and understanding what's working and what's not working, and continuously building that feedback loop, right, into the products and services we are creating and delivering. To that point, we've talked a lot about embedded finance in this industry, right? And really the idea that we need to meet customers where they are in that customer journey. One thing that I didn't hear as much of this week as maybe I would like to have is that financial services and products can be stressful for people. Mm-hmm. Like people are using these products and services to do other things in their lives, right? The actual credit line or account or insurance product is frankly not that exciting to people, right? And if anything, causes stress for people, right? I think we might run the risk, because we are all so deep in this community, of forgetting that sometimes, right? I think we need to understand that from two angles, right? One, it's about giving people the choices, right, that allow them to kind of live their lives and improve their lives in the way they want to, but also protecting customers, right, against the stresses and strains that these products and services, particularly when not deployed in the most effective way, can cause in people's lives, right? So we have that responsibility as a sector, but again, that's really about meeting customers sort of where they are. I do think this point around sort of increasing risk to consumers, to businesses, to broader markets is something we just need to grapple with. I mean, climate shocks and geopolitical risks are all around us. But what do those risks do, right? They disrupt supply chains, right? They can create food insecurities that come out of those disrupted supply chains. They can create health insecurities, right? And health challenges that are short-term in nature, but that can have far-reaching effects in people's lives. So we really need to be thinking about that. Again, I go back to a point that Ajay made in the first session about being more proactive about thinking about those diseases of lifestyle that people are experiencing, right? And being early about that process. I think when we think about all these risks that are out there, we need to adopt a much more systems thinking approach, right? And understanding how all these pieces fit together and the ripple effects, right, of how these things can create other risks, and how the products and services we create have to sort of really kind of contemplate that combination of things that people are facing. And that complexity is not easy, right? I think we all have to have much more conversation across the public sector, the nonprofit sector, the private sector, around how do we actually tackle these things at a global level, but also at a local level, right? And I think that's actually really important, so that we can make decisions in a more agile way, right? And allow the ability to get products and services out there faster, right? But again, with the responsibility in place. One thing that, Greta talked about this morning, right, which I thought was really important, is remembering that there are still different channels out there to reach customers. We talk so much about digital transformation, but we need to understand that last mile, particularly for so many of the 2 billion who are still unserved or underserved, needs to be through physical channels, mm-hmm. right? And thinking about the financial services providers and others who still have those physical channels, and how do we actually ensure that we incorporate that in an effective way as we kind of continue to grow our digital sort of channels as well, is going to be really important, I think, right? Just to make sure we're reaching people and we're not widening disparities, right, as we sort of go along. And maybe one final thing, the role of businesses and the private sector cannot be underestimated. I spent a lot of time thinking about this in my previous role at Bain, and really helping, businesses think about how they can drive sustainable businesses, but also drive the social outcomes that create opportunity for them as well. And I think we still need to kind of continue to think about that as an industry, like how do we marshal more and more of the private sector into this discussion and conversation? And this week has been great at that, right? At really bringing together some of those actors. So anyway, I've said a lot, but let me pause there and think about if there's anything else you would add.
But the one, I mean, I'm glad you brought out the discussion that Greta and Andre had earlier this morning. I think that theme came through in a couple of other sessions also where, we spoke about climate shocks and what's required. And this whole, when we think about more traditional organizations that serve the last mile, what are instruments that can, help them do that in terms of investment instruments? How can we think about blended finance more impactfully? And at the end of the day, I mean, and Greta brought up the example of Northern Arc, and she brought up the example of Kaleidofin. But what that team has done is effectively, used blended finance to build local capital markets and create new asset classes. And we've been involved in some way in the investment as part of the portfolio, but there is a lot to unpack there.
There's a lot to unpack there,
and we have to think about how that can now work in other markets. And I think there is a lot of potential and opportunity.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm wondering, one question I have for you as a researcher, right? As someone who thinks about this, with that lens and in a kind of broad way across the sector, where are the areas where you think we need to build a more systematic evidence base, right? For policymaking, but not just for policymaking, right? To help those of us who are implementing, right, do the work better, right? Where are the areas where we need to develop more of that evidence base? Because we heard a bit about that this week, and the need to do that more.
Yeah, and I also want to hear from the audience. So, continue to put in the chat what you might have thought as important areas for research. There were a few things that stood out to me. One is, I think, this need for greater transparency in trying to understand what is working and what is not. And that's true for businesses. It's also true for state actors. And with the, with what we want to achieve over the next few years, we don't have the room to not be transparent, because the people who suffer from unintended consequences of policy actions are often the poorest and the most vulnerable. So as we push the frontiers, I think it's okay to admit that we might have made mistakes, but we just need to do it faster. And we need data that can help us then pivot and make amends as needed. So much more need for transparency. And, that could be like payment failure rates. It could be the number of people that are using particular payment channels and why it's not working. And that's where the questions will arise. I think the second thing that is good to acknowledge is that DPI is here to stay as much as digital is, because it brings in efficiencies in various ways, and it makes life better when it works. What we need to make sure is that it doesn't eliminate alternate choices. And that we have sufficient data on the economics of the systems that we're setting up. And that doesn't mean just the upfront investment that's being made, but also, the costs that consumers incur, the psychological costs. We used to talk a lot about this in the old world of microfinance. I think with digital, the big assumption is that psychological costs disappear. They don't. They actually just get transferred to the the technology provider. As far as the consumer is concerned, it's still very distressing to not know what channels to access. And I think that came through in a lot of, it goes back to your point of mapping the journey beyond the point of sale.
Yeah, that's right. I think that's really important.
I think on consumer protection, there is a lot more work to be done. We know that there are several risks that are rising, but we also know that women are not complaining as much, but we don't know why they're not complaining. And we don't have tools that are needed to identify and solve these risks. And I know in the chat, it came up that in the session with CGAP and IPA yesterday, we heard that mystery shoppers stand out when they're sent to audit digital financial services. Because it's just not easy to hide yourself in that situation, which means we need better tools, and we we need regulators to not lag behind innovation so significantly, because that's going to erode trust. And then my final thing is trust. I think trust has been brought up through all the sessions consistently. It's a complex concept because we tend to identify it in terms of incidents of distrust. But we need systematic research on what can drive trust. And I think what I took away this week is that it differs widely depending on context and consumer segments. Because for a woman that's accessing, services from an agent in rural India, trust manifests in the form of consumer experience and what the agent has provided her. For a person in Kenya, it is the ability to get their services without paying bribes. Those are very different things, and you're trusting in, we're using the word trust in both cases, but the underlying drivers are very different. So we need a trust barometer for financial inclusion.
No, I think it makes a lot of sense. I mean, it's more, we need something more nuanced than the broader trust measurement for the financial services industry, more particularly, right? Because when we're talking about the most vulnerable segments, the definition of trust and both what drives trust, but what also, and Linda brought this up in the session earlier in the week on just how, the loss of credibility can be very quick, right? With a incidence of distrust, right? As you described it. So I think just getting much more sophisticated about how we measure that and track that in a context-specific way is important. I want to go back to this point also. I think as we think about the evidence base, right, you make the point around how it is so context-specific, right? And I think we need to grapple with that. It's not straightforward, right? I mean, there are some global themes and trends we can sort of talk about and think about, but at the end of the day, this is very local, right? It is about the lives people lead in their communities and how those communities work, right? And I think we need to, continue to develop that local base. And that's why I think it takes all of us, right? All the 3,000 people and more who are in this conversation to really be thinking about all these things and continuing the kind of conversation across the group here.
I know in the audience chat, there's a lot of chatter on the importance of subsidies. I do want to go back to something that you said about choice, because with digital, I mean, yes, digital is ubiquitous and it's here to stay. But when just before we joined, you said something interesting about also having the choice to access physical. Do you want to expand on that a little bit?
Yeah, I think that's right. I mean, look, I think when you think about people and the lives they lead, I do think, first of all, there's just a simple question of access, right? But I do think for a lot of people, the ability to talk to someone, right, in a physical way, someone they trust, is still going to be important, right? And I think about, I might use the term omni-channel here or multi-channel here, because I think it is really about the combination of those things in both, helping give people the choices they need at the times they need it, right? What product to use, how to use it, right? Where to get the help that they need in order to use it more effectively. And I think that might take still working both in a digital way, because that is efficient, right? And can deliver, a lot of products and services at scale in a really cost-effective way. But I think, again, to reach that last mile, to reach those last 2 billion, we need to be cognizant that for many people, the physical channel is still going to be an absolutely critical one.
And also one that can ensure continuity of services.
Exactly.
When there's a hurricane.
Yeah. When power goes out, right? I mean, and these things are happening, and unfortunately they are happening more and more. And unfortunately, they are affecting the most vulnerable in the community far more, right, than I think most of us frankly realize.
So where do we go from here?
Yeah. What's next, Jayshree?
Well, first, I'd be remiss to not thank the donors, City Foundation, who's our diamond sponsor, Jersey Overseas Aid, the Conrad and N. Hilton Foundation, who supported us, all the session contributors, and the team at Accion and CFI, without whom this event would not be possible. This is a 24/7 effort during this week, and it requires fundraising and other support through the year. And we have colleagues who are dedicated to helping us so that we can deliver what you've seen this week and what we've done for the past 10 years. So it's an incredible honor to be part of this effort. Before I get into what's coming up next, I just also want to tell the people listening in and who will possibly listen in to the recorded session that all live session recordings will be uploaded by the end of the day. So if you hadn't had a chance to watch any of the sessions, don't despair. It's all there. It's going to be available through the year. But what's next is that we want to announce Financial Inclusion Week 2025 dates. So I'd like everybody to block the week of October 7th. You should, if you registered for this event, you'll get an email as well. And keep your eyes open for announcements that will make Financial Inclusion Week 2025 and the run up to it even more exciting. And like you said, this is a community of 3,000 people, over 3,000 people actually, gathered from over 124 countries. What can we do to grow that? And what can we do to work together to build this future where we achieve the impact that we seek?
Yeah. Send us your ideas, because I'd love for this conversation to be a more regular one, right? I mean, yes, we have a week next year that's already on the calendar, and please mark it, and please come, and please think about the sessions that you might like to do at that event. But also, hopefully people have made some connections here, heard some people that they want to connect with a little bit more as you think about this work. So continue the conversations, kind of in an individual way, in a small group way, but also tell us, right, if there are things that you think would be interesting, right, for us to think about as we sort of go through the year. Because I do think that, I don't think we have time, right? I don't think we have time to wait another year before we have the next sort of big conversation like this. And those will be important, but it's all the work that people are doing day to day that's really important. I will also say that, and make a plug for, these sessions will be uploaded, they'll be online. I'm sure that no one has been able to go to all of them, right? I mean, everyone is busy, everyone is doing the good work out there. Go back and look through the list, because you might find as you do your work that something is interesting, something is important. And there's a lot of content out there that I think, is really valuable. For me, that's actually one of the coolest things about Financial Inclusion Week, is that the content is out there. It can be referenced when people need it, right? And who some of the experts are in some of these spaces. So I would encourage people to reach out.
Yeah, we had 67 on-demand sessions, 43 live sessions, 347 live speakers, packed into 4 days. So that's a lot of brain power right there.
Yeah, but I leave energized. I leave energized about the work that's happening here. Look, I think, as everyone has said over the week, the work will not get easier. It will be harder, but I do feel energized that there are a lot of people thinking about it, right? And thinking about it in specific ways that I think address specific sort of issues and challenges, and keep that customer in mind at the end of the day. I think, I think about Zubaida's session yesterday. And for me, it was really moving, right? To kind of really hear her talk about, all the different sort of journeys that women around the world are on, right, in their lives, with their families, with their communities, and how the work that is going on, that all of you are doing, is touching them in important ways. So I guess I'd leave with that final sort of thought. I mean, let's not forget the people, right, who are at the end of this, right, and that's what keeps us going.
On that note, thank you. And thank you, Sonia, for that beautiful illustration. It's just, I don't know how you do this, but thank you for everything that you do. And thank you for logging in. Look forward to seeing you next year, and keep your eyes peeled for everything, all the updates from our end.
And have a great weekend, everyone.
And have a great weekend.
Bye-bye.
Bye.